I'll do the voice. Tell me when to start.
Okay, wait. 3, 2, 1.
Wait, what do you mean?
Oh, wait.
You have to play something and then tell me to jump in. Or I can just jump in. It's 9 p.m. and the tutorial will start soon. We just in the waiting room, gonna see some cool dude animating on the room, and we'll see you soon in Tutorial Tuesdays. Yeah, Tutorial Tuesdays. Sandra? Yeah.
Tutorial Tuesdays.
Tutorial Tuesdays. Woo!
Yeah, that's pretty good.
Are we recording that?
Oh wait,
Yeah.
did we click on the recording?
I think I did.
Oh, okay.
Oh shoot. Nice.
I guess we have our opening.
There it is.
So, do we start?
Yeah.
Well, it's technically 8:59,
Oh, okay.
Start
so
30
we'll
seconds.
let the stragglers come in.
Yeah.
That's good.
Well, now
What
I'm
a-
scared you're gonna like wheel over it. Here, I'll put it somewhere you can't wheel over it.
Thank you.
Tell us, what we can expect to learn in this tutorial.
Yeah.
I'll just read off the description I wrote.
Okay.
Grab a pen, a computer, and your favorite flavor of gum as you watch your brain absorb a compact and wet drop of After Effects knowledge.
Wow.
So,
I've never watched my brain
Wow.
absorb stuff before.
yeah, it's kind of hard.
Uh-huh. Hmm.
Wait, where does it say that?
Why does
I'm
it say
sorry.
that?
I'm trying to see where you wrote that. Wait, did you add tags? Oh no, those are the
Oh.
ones we added a while ago. Ballroom dancing.
What?
What?
Yeah.
I guess that makes
Don't worry
sense.
about it.
Okay, I guess we should start.
Let's
Um,
do it.
So, welcome to the Jersey House Tutorial Tuesday. It's an annual event every 2 weeks. Um, I'm Jack, host of tonight's Tutorial Tuesday, and I'm joined by my co-hosts.
I'm Felipe.
I'm Sandra.
That's their names. So yeah, we're just gonna go over basic After Effects knowledge, how to kind of get set up in After Effects, and how to set up a composition, and kind of just learn like the basics of animation, compositing, and some other cool stuff. So yeah, I guess we'll just get started. I guess I should have like the chat somewhere. Oh, David's here.
Yeah. Should we have should we be in the Discord so David can ask the questions?
Oh, true.
Yeah.
Unless you want to just ask questions in the chat, David.
Yeah, I don't have headphones on this computer, but
Oh,
or speakers.
all right, David. Just
But you can play it off your phone.
true. All right. Oh.
Yeah, there's basically going to be like 3 different chapters to this live stream. The first one you can probably follow along with, but the last two will probably be a little bit tougher because they're like, I mean, you can still try, but I'm going to be using assets that you won't have, but should still be good knowledge to use in future projects. So yeah, when you launch After Effects, you get like this pretty blank slate view, and I'm just going to go over like all the different panels and what they mean and what you can do with them. So over here is the project panel, and this is basically where when you import stuff, all of it will show up in here. So if you import like this plant image, that'll appear here, and you can bring that in to your composition. And so the middle screen, you can't really see it yet, but that's going to be where like the main composition is, and that's where you can work with different elements and animate and composite stuff together. And then down here is the timeline where you can see all of your layers and see all the keyframes and basically manage all of your assets there. And then in the top right, there's the effect controls panel. So if you were to like put in an effect like glow or something. Oh wait, I don't have a composition yet. I'll just make one just to show it.
Say hi to Cloud.
Hey Cloud. I'll explain what I'm doing later, but just to show the effect controls, they basically show you like how you can manipulate and edit each of the different effects that are in After Effects. So glow is just one example, but there's like a whole bunch that we can go over later. So yeah, then in the right corner, or the right part of the screen, there's a bunch of different tabs. You don't really need to use any of these except for like effects and maybe like tracker and character for text. Because these are all just kind of like playing the video or seeing audio levels, which can be helpful if you're doing audio stuff, but generally you don't really need to use that too much. And yeah, there's a bunch of stuff up here as well. There's like composition. Hey David. Yeah, so there's like composition options, layers, effects, animation, and then different windows that you can access here too. But that's kind of the basics of it. So I'm just going to delete this and then go over making a composition. So basically compositions are like the main way you work in After Effects. Like it's all contained inside of a comp. And so you can change the width and height to whatever your project needs. I usually work at 23.976 frame rate. I forget why it's so specific, but I'm sure there's a good reason for it. And so, yeah, duration and resolution and everything. So for the sake of today, we'll just do 1920 by 1080, which is just like the standard HD TV size. And so once you're in the composition, you just see a blank screen. And so you can start adding stuff just by going up to layer, and then you can do text, solid, light, camera. We're just going to do a solid and make it black. And by default, it'll just match whatever the composition size is. So this will be 1920 by 1080. So yeah, so for the first example, I'm just going to do like a bouncing ball project to kind of show like how you can animate stuff in After Effects. So yeah, I just kind of rushed through that part, but if you go up to view, you can do show rulers, and these rulers will appear around the screen. And you can actually click and drag from them to bring out a guide if you need like horizontal or vertical guide. The reason I'm bringing that out is just for the ball. So you have like a horizontal line to know where the ball should hit. And so, yeah, we have the horizontal line, and then to make the actual ball, you go up to here where this little square is in the toolbar. and there's a little rectangle, and if you click on that and hold it, you get a bunch of different options for different shapes that you can use. And so there's an ellipse tool, so you just want to click on that. Then if you click and drag while holding shift, it'll make a circle appear, and so you can just keep dragging that until you get a size that you want. And so, sorry, doing some stuff out of habit, but so before you, actually, I guess first off, let me make the ball white so I can actually see it. So if you go up here, there's a fill and stroke option, and you can just change that to full on white. Yeah, and then stroke doesn't really matter, but you can have a stroke on it or not. But then to make it so you can actually animate using the center point of the circle, there's like this little crosshair that's basically like the pivot point of the object. And so if you go up to this icon here, it's called the pan behind tool. It kind of looks like a D-pad or something. You can click on that and then move it towards the center. And to make sure it like locks into the center of the circle, you can hold down Control, and it'll automatically like snap to that point. So yeah, now you have your circle, and if you go down to the shape layer and just click on the arrow and then go down to transform, you have a bunch of different options like position, scale, rotation, and opacity. And so for right now, I'm just going to focus on position. And what you could do is just animate, like, if you click on this, it'll create a keyframe. And you could just animate where you just click one point in time and set a keyframe and then move it. And then that's sort of the basics of how animation works in this program, where it just tweens between 2 points. But what's actually easiest for making a ball bounce is if you kind of get rid of the keyframes there, you can go to position and right click and then go down to separate dimensions, where you can actually change the X position and Y position individually. So you can animate them like separately, which just makes it easier to, like, if you just want to kind of move at like a constant pace across the screen while the Y position changes at a different rate, this makes it easier to do that. So we'll kind of start the ball up here, and then click on X position, like this little circle next to X position, which will set a keyframe on that point. And then I think like probably 6 seconds in, you can set another one. And then on this point, you just want to move it to the other side of the screen. And so right now it'll just kind of glide across. Yeah. It's pretty neat. Yeah, so we got that working now. And then to make it bounce, you go to the Y position and set a keyframe there. But actually these keyframes will be a little bit different, because you want to right click on the keyframe itself and go down to this option where it says Keyframe Assistant. And there's an option called Easy Ease. And I'll explain what that does in a second. But then same thing like with the X position, except we won't go as far. You just set another keyframe in time, and then this one can be down here where the horizontal line is. So we can see it kind of hit the ground there. And then we'll set another one. We can actually set this on like 1 second just to make it easier to know how far we're bouncing. But then on the 2 second one, on the 2 second time marker, copy and paste this first Y position. Oops. Yeah, copy and paste that, so that way it bounces back up. And yeah, so that's like the basics of it. So if you play it back, it's like anti-gravity ball. But it's sort of bouncing, and then the way to get it so it like has that nice rubber ball bounce that we're kind of looking for is to if you select the keyframes, like if you go to Y position and select it, there's a little option on the top right of the timeline where it says graph editor. And so if you click on that, you'll see the actual graph that's making up this animation. And this is a way to like fine tune the motion of the ball as it bounces, so that we get more of like a fine hit when it hits against the ground. And so the way to do that is basically we need this point to be really sharp. So you can actually click and drag the handles so they kind of create like this nice, you know, perfect triangle shape. And oh, I think I actually have this backwards. Oh, no, that's right. So yeah, like basically the contrast just has to be enough where the ball like basically hits the ground on one frame and then just immediately back up. So you just want to make these really sharp curves. Oops. Yeah, it's probably too long, but that's kind of the rough idea. Is like the sharper the contrast, the more it's going to look like a bounce. And the way to actually play stuff back, you can either do spacebar or 0. But yeah, we can actually move these keyframes back a little bit. So like, instead of doing it at 1 second, we just do it at half a second. And then we can move this one to the 1 second spot. And if you click and drag on them while holding Control and Shift, it'll keep it like locked at the horizontal, so it won't like go up or down on the graph.
Hold Control and Shift.
While you're
Okay.
while you're pulling these handles.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's like roughly what a ball bounce should look like, and then we don't need this extra keyframe. But then you can just kind of duplicate all of these and then watch as it kind of travels across the screen. So just Control C, Control V all of them. And then this this thing that I'm adjusting is like the render preview. So whatever is selected in this is what's going to play back. So you want to drag that until the ball is off screen. Yeah, so that's the rough idea. You can obviously like keep refining it until it looks like as beautiful as it can be. But that's like generally how to animate in After Effects. And it's really all done in this area with these keyframes and just like fine tuning the graph as you sort of work through what you want to animate. So that's it for the ball. And then I also want to show how to animate like text in After Effects, because that's like kind of a big aspect of this program, and like what a lot of people use it for is doing like typography animation. So we'll just put something random here.
Totally random.
Yeah. So if we want this to animate, like if we want it to like fade on in some cool way, we can go down to here and go back to transform. And we have the opacity controller here. And so this will basically just change how transparent it is. So you can set one here and then set one later on. And then just make sure the first one is 0. So you can have it like fade on like that. And then to make it extra cool, you can go to position and do two keyframes, one at both of the same points as the opacity keyframes, and then just do like the same thing we did before, where we separate the dimensions. And we only actually need the X position for this one, so we can just kind of we can turn off the Y position keyframes and just animate on the X axis. And then again, to like do animation with the motion graph, like how we did before, you have to right click these, go down to keyframe assistant, and then do easy ease. And so if we change the position to be kind of like over here at first, we can kind of make it slide in as it fades in. So you see right now it's like it starts slow and then gets fast and then slows in. We can actually just have it start pretty fast and then really crank up the contrast between those 2 points. So that way it does kind of a cool slide in.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Next, TikTok.
Yeah. And there's a bunch of like weird stuff you can do with text too, where like there's a little animate option with like the little arrow here, and you can use this to kind of fine tune text animation. So if you wanted to animate the tracking of the letters, you can actually just like select on that tracking option of the animate menu, and you can change the amount that the text tracks out. So that can be kind of cool if you want to do something like, I don't know, kind of epic, like the text could track out as it scales up. So I'll just delete these keyframes for right now. And then, so we have that keyframed, and then we can also animate the scale at the same time, but we also want to move the what's it called? Anchor point before we animate the scale. Otherwise it would scale out of the J instead of the center. So yeah, we just choose the anchor point and then, or sorry, we set a keyframe at scale, and then we, I guess actually the anchor point doesn't really matter in this case because it doesn't animate with the tracking. So this is actually a good way to show nulls, which is another big part of After Effects. So like right now, like we are trying to animate this, but the center point doesn't be like, it loses accuracy as it tracks out, as the text tracks out. So to kind of have like a fixed point that we can work off of, you can create something that's called a null. So if you go up to layer and go to new, the same place that you would go to create a solid, you can go down here to create a new null object. And so this is basically just like a blank layer that you can use as a reference point for other layers. And basically what that means is like, I place this roughly in the center of this text, and then I can go down here and you can actually parent it to that null using this little like pick whip device thing that basically like will make it so it follows wherever that layer that you're parenting it to goes. So you select that and then drag it over to the null, and then when you move the null, it'll move the text as well. So then if you animate the scale on the text layer, or sorry, if you animate the text, if you animate the null with the scale value, you can actually make it so it'll scale up with the null and not from the text. And then we also have to center the text itself. then I would just have to move over here. Yeah, so that's like just a cool thing you can do with type. There's a bunch of different options as well besides just tracking. Like you can do character offset, where basically you can have like each letter come on individually, and a bunch of other cool stuff like opacity, where you can animate the opacity of each layer individually, or each letter individually. So that's pretty helpful if you want to do like some really cool text animation.
What did scaling the null, like what did that fix? Like if you were to scale the text instead of the null,
Mm-hmm.
what would have gone wrong there?
I was actually wrong. That didn't fix it.
Okay.
I thought it did, but no, it was actually just the text had to be centered.
Gotcha.
But yeah, nulls are still helpful though, because let's say you want to animate like the position of text, but you also want it to move, like you want it to move around the screen like crazy, but you also want it to like do some other like secondary motion, like maybe it's moving across the screen at the same time. You could basically animate it on the text layer and then attach it to a null and then animate that null, so that both are like animating separate things, but you know, concurrently. So it just gives you more freedom with like how to make something move around the screen.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sweet.
Thank you.
Yeah, so that's oh yeah, there was actually one more thing I wanted to show for this first segment. I was gonna make like a globe basically spinning around
Oh.
in a very simple way, but let me just get like the asset here. So I'm just going to make another circle. And just put it kind of roughly in the center of the screen. I'll just make that black so we can see it. And so I have this world map composition, which is just basically the world map, just by itself in this one composition. But the reason why it's separated is because we can actually bring that into here, and then we can put that inside of this circle, essentially using this circle as like a mat for the world map. So we first want to scale it down so it roughly looks like how it should look, something like that. And then if you go down to this area where the top of it says track mat, and there's like a little drop down menu. There's alpha mat and luma mat. For this we want to do alpha mat, but that'll basically, like the layer that you're putting it into will cut out that image, so it's just like inside the circle. Then you can also move it around inside, so it's basically like a container for whatever composition that you're putting it inside of, or any image or whatever you're using. It can be done with any kind of layer. It doesn't just have to be a composition. But what's nice about making it a comp is that you can then go into that comp, and then if I want to like add a nice background to this to show the ocean, I can do that. And then I can also like I can also color this, go to effects and do fill. I can color this green. And so basically what's nice about working with comps in this way is that you can do a whole bunch of like stuff with different layers and kind of put stuff together, but then it's all contained into a single comp, which you can then just use as a single layer in a different composition. So a lot of After Effects becomes about just making a bunch of compositions that go into compositions, and it becomes kind of crazy, but it makes more and more sense the more you do it. You're just kind of like packaging things to make it easier to work with, and kind of manipulate things within a composition rather than trying to do it all in one place.
Do you have any advice for keeping track of your compositions into other compositions, into other ones?
I would just say be good at naming stuff, and also like what I always do is make a folder that's all for comps, and I'll put all my my main comps in there, and then for all of the stuff that's like a comp within a comp, I'll put pre before it, so it's just like a pre-comp. Then I'll make a separate folder for that, so I kind of know which ones are like the main comp that contains everything, and then which ones are just like the comps that have like some graphics that I'm using here and there. Yeah, that's one way to kind of make it easier to keep track of. But yeah, this is like a really rough way you could animate the globe. I mostly just wanted to show off compositions for this, but if you wanted to just do like a rough globe spin, you could just like animate the position of it moving around like that. And it looks maybe good enough. I don't know.
Well, that's sort of what we have to do for the new short.
Yeah, that's actually why I'm doing it, because
Uh,
David wanted to know about like animating in After Effects.
yeah. He said that was so fast, but I remember some of this.
Yeah, it'll be recorded too.
Yeah. We'll
Yeah.
post it somewhere.
Yeah, sorry, I might be going a little too fast.
Good.
Yeah, so that's basically it for like the fundamentals of After Effects. Then I kind of wanted to show like how to composite an animation together using, if you have like an animated clip that you did in like Photoshop or a 3D program, you could bring that into After Effects and like composite it, put like fancy effects on it, color correct, and really just like put together an animation. So I actually have like a reference file that I'm going to use. So this is the final composition of an animation I made. But I did all the actual animation I did all the character animation in Photoshop, and then this background was made in Cinema 4D. So it's kind of like putting together two different like mediums and programs into one final animation. And so After Effects is really good for doing that kind of stuff. So this is the Photoshop file where you have like the full animation. And so if you're doing a hand-drawn animated piece, you would basically just render this on an alpha channel. So we would turn off the background, turn off the white, until you just have like this by itself. And so you then go to export, render video.
God. So saggy.
Yeah. And then these are kind of the settings that I use. This will get you an alpha render. So you do QuickTime, and then that'll make it an MOV, which supports alpha channels. Then just make sure everything matches what you're working with. And then you want to make sure that this alpha channel option has to be on, and then what I usually do is straight unmatted. I think if you do pre-multiply with black, it'll actually just render it on a black background. I haven't really seen a use for that, so I'll just always do straight unmatted for that option. Yeah, I think I'm basically just going to try and recreate this roughly from scratch, just to kind of give an example of like how you would put together a project like this. So I'm just going to duplicate this and then delete everything. And then just kind of go piece by piece, like what makes up a project or an animation that looks like this. So the first thing would be the background. So because the character is behind a piece of the background, I rendered out two separate images. One of the background with no like fence or no barrier. And then another one where I think it's somewhere around here. Yeah, here we go. And then one that's just like the foreground. And so that way, when we have the render of the character, and you can see he's in a pre-comp here, but this is basically this is what would have been rendered from Photoshop, is like this animation here. And so yeah, then you put him in between. And so that's roughly the animation as it is. Obviously, like, I also had to put in this watering can, which was basically just like all done in Photoshop, but I just rendered out the sequence and then animated it to his hand. But yeah, the way to kind of get things like this is what it looks like now, and then this is what it looks like in the final. So it's kind of subtle differences, but it's mostly playing around with color and adding some like lighting effects and just stuff to kind of spruce it up, which I think After Effects is really good for. So there's different adjustment layers, which are basically layers that you can like add color correction effects, just any kind of different effect on top of the image. So if you, like right here, it's a noise layer. Actually, I'll show where it is in the actual menu. So if you right click, like the same way you'd make a solid or make text, or a null object, you just right click and do new, and then there's the option for adjustment layer. And so here you can then search like whatever effect that you want to be over the image. So here we're going to do some noise. You can just like crank that up to 5 or whatever, which just adds like a little bit of noise throughout the video to help make it feel a little more alive and that it was actually like filmed on something. And then there's also stuff you can do with masking to kind of add some contrast throughout the scene. So for this one, like I had a dark blue solid that I made, and then I masked out just kind of a rough like shape of how it would be distributed throughout the scene. So I'll just kind of show that. Same thing, go to new and then hit solid. And since this is like, I want to have some dark contrast in this scene, just like kind of made a dark purple. And then you can't really see anything when you first put the solid down, but usually what I do is just turn it off for the time being, but make sure that you have it selected. And then if you go up to this little pen tool, you can just kind of start clicking around like roughly where you want this color to be throughout the scene. And so then when you turn it back on, it'll just be kind of this blocky shape that's in the scene. But then the way to make that more natural and make it feel like it's a part of the actual environment, you want to open up this layer, and then you see like all the mask options. So that's the thing that we just made. And so we can basically just up the feather of the mask until it just kind of starts to subtly be distributed throughout the scene. Yeah, so you can kind of just do it however it looks good, whatever looks the best. Then you can also adjust like the opacity if you don't want it to be too strong. And if you just want like a subtle shadow throughout. Yeah. And then if you want to have some light coming down, you can also do another adjustment layer. And then there's a bunch of color correction options, but what I tend to use is one that's called Lumetri Color, which gives you a whole bunch of options for like how to adjust the temperature and just like individual colors of the shadows and highlights. So what I tend to do with a scene is like to kind of have it go from like a warm to cool color palette. I'll blast the temperature up and then make a mask how we did, similar to how we did with the dark purple solid, and just kind of have it like coming from where the light source would be, because in this case it's sort of like the sun is shining down on this guy, and then blast the feather again, and then also up the exposure on this, so you just got kind of a sense of like a sun beaming down on him. And another nice thing to really amp up the contrast and really make it pop is usually what I'll do first, actually. And it's called levels. And this basically changes the values of the color throughout the scene. So once you just click and drag levels and bring it over, you get all these options for like how you want to change the color values. And so you can see, like, as you drag this over, it really blasts the highlights. Obviously we don't want it to be like that crazy, but I'll just do it enough where like you start to really see the highlights of this scene, and then do the same thing with the other side of it where you crunch the shadows a bit. And you can finesse this more and more. But you can see the difference where this is before, this is after. So it really just makes things kind of pop out more. And then I guess finally what I do is bring in some like actual live action footage of like dust and maybe some like spotlight or lighting. So I have this footage of this dust here. So if I want that to be kind of showing like in the light, you can bring this file in. I guess I should show like how to import stuff. So if you go to import, file import, and then just find whatever it is that you want to bring into the scene, which in this case is this dust particles. It'll then appear in that project window. And so you can just click and drag that into the scene, and then it'll appear right on top of everything else. And so for this dust, I kind of want it to be subtle and just have it like a little bit in the light. But you can see it's like on a black background right now. So it's going to be really hard, or it's going to look really stupid. But if you go down to the mode, if you ever use Photoshop, it's basically like layer styles. So you can, there's like multiply, add, lighten, screen. You can change how it's going to be displayed over the image. And so if it has a black background, you can actually do the add option, and then it'll get rid of that and just leave whatever's white in the footage. And so now you have that just kind of displaying over the image. And of course this has like a hard edge that we don't want to show, so what we would do is mask that out in the same way that we did with the other stuff. So just making kind of a rough mask of like, this is the stuff we want to show, and then adding just a little bit of a feather so that way nothing just like cuts off and it like kind of fades out as it moves off screen. So just like a lot of little subtle stuff is what really makes a scene feel more alive, I've found. So just looking for opportunities to kind of bring maybe some dust in the light, or maybe like reflections in the window here. You could even add like shadows of clouds going by, just whatever you think would really add to the scene and make it feel more immersive. And then for rendering, I'll just kind of go over like different ways that you could actually render this scene out. So if you want like the highest quality render, you would have your composition selected, and then go up to File, Export, and then go to Add to Render Queue. So you see it down below. There's a whole bunch of different renders. And this is the one that you're working with now. And so you want to check it on. That way we have to actually save it somewhere first. So I'll just make a folder called renders. And save it there. And so if you go down to this, it might say something different for different people depending on what their default settings are. But mine says high quality, but that's basically the option for the output module. So if you click on that, you get a whole bunch of options for how you actually want to render this out. And so what I've kind of discovered is that the best render settings, if you want like a completely uncompressed, beautiful picture, you can make sure it's QuickTime for the format, and then you do trillions of colors for the depth. And then what's most important is the format options. And this is like the video codec. And this one, Apple ProRes 444, is like, I think it's like one of the best codecs where like you're just getting a really crisp image. And so that's like been my go-to for a long time. And if you wanted this one on alpha as well, you could also change this RGB setting to RGB plus alpha if you wanted to like render it on an alpha and then bring it into another project. But for this sake, we don't have to do that. And so that's basically it for like an MOV file. But sometimes you don't want to work with an MOV because they're really huge, and maybe you want to upload to like Instagram or some social media, and the file's too big. That's basically where media encoder comes into play. And so the same way you kind of access that, or the same way you access the render queue, you go down to export, but instead you hit add to Adobe Media Encoder. So that'll actually launch up this program called Media Encoder, which can compress a file down to a much more manageable size as an MP4 format. And so it takes a little bit, but it'll eventually load in this queue. And I found that like I've never had to adjust the MP4 settings for this. I've just used them as is, but it's possible there are better options for that. But I think generally when you're just trying to make stuff more manageable to like upload to the internet on like different websites, this is kind of the way to go. But we're not actually going to render. That's just kind of roughly how you would do it. And yeah, so I think that's it for compositing things together. And I just had one more thing I kind of wanted to go over. And I'll open another project for that. Yeah, this is from an abandoned project, but I just needed something to work off of. So you can do character animation inside of After Effects, but I feel like that's a tutorial in and of itself. So I figured instead of showing like how to actually rig and animate a character, I would just kind of show like the main tool that's used behind all character animation, and like kind of show the basics of that tool, and then maybe eventually go into character animation in another date. But basically that tool is called the Puppet tool, and that's this little pin that's up here. And so this is a powerful tool, not just for character animation, but if you want to like, if you have like a pre-built piece of artwork that you want to animate, like let's say you painted in Photoshop like this beautiful flower or tree or something, and you wanted to kind of have it like flowing in the breeze. Obviously, like it's not exactly clear how you would animate that, considering it's like a fixed piece of artwork. But what's nice about After Effects is they actually have like a way to do that. And so to kind of illustrate what I mean by that, I have this little plant. It's not going to look that good, but just for the sake of like showing this, like if I wanted to add a plant into this scene, I guess first I would just put it in the middle of the composition. And we'll just like right click and then hit pre-compose. And what that does is that it'll put that image into its own composition, so that way you can just work with it by itself. So now it's like all by itself. It's just the one layer inside the composition. And to actually animate this, we would go up to the puppet tool, and if you just start clicking onto the image, you can see that there's a little yellow dot that appeared. And then when I start moving that around, the whole image starts to move. And so basically what you're doing is you're kind of making like bones to manipulate the image. So if you think about all of these as like joints in a character, like if you were to have a character's arm and then you had like 3 joints throughout that arm, you could then manipulate the artwork to make the arm like wave or whatever. So it's kind of the same principle where like we have these different points that we can manipulate the artwork at. So to keep illustrating that, I'll just start putting a bunch of points all throughout. Just kind of mark up as much as you can, so that way you can animate more and more points. So that's probably good enough. And then one helpful thing about like, if you want to see where keyframes are very easily, instead of having to go like through all the different menus and sub-menus and everything, you can actually just select a layer and then press the U key, and then it'll show you every single keyframe that's on that layer. And so you see that every single one of those points that we marked, it actually set a keyframe onto the layer itself. And so for the sake of making this easier to work with, we're going to move all of these to the very start of the timeline. So all of those have been marked on the marked as keyframes, and then we can move ahead like how we did with the bouncing ball, to then set another keyframe. Just select all of them. So yeah, all of them should be marked now, and then on that point we can then, so you see the yellow points are gone now, but if you just select the puppet effect and the effect controls, all of them will appear again. So if we want this to kind of flow like in the wind, we can just start to kind of move stuff. You can also like select multiples at a time to make it a little bit easier to work with. But, like have this kind of move up, maybe have this one move down. So just selecting it by groups is probably easiest, depending on what you're animating. So yeah, just kind of move a bunch of these elements around. Yeah, so we can see it starts to move there. Yeah, and then we could probably make it look better, but just to show this off, I'm just going to copy and paste the first keyframes. Whoops. Copy and paste the first keyframes over here, so that way it'll start to kind of loop. And then we can just like copy these for a little bit, just throughout the composition. Then if we go back out to the main comp, I should also explain how I got back there so fast. So when I was in that composition, if you actually select tab, you can kind of see like the hierarchy of all the compositions and like what's inside of the greater comp. So you can then select comp 1, which was the main composition that we were coming from, and then we're back into like the main scene. So yeah, now we have the plant. We can move this over and maybe like scale it up a little bit. And then we can actually bring it down here so it kind of matches the color more, because there's some adjustment layers that are doing that same color correction stuff that I mentioned. And then we'll just kind of let this play. So you can see how the puppet pin, all the puppet pins have how they animate and how they can move artwork. So right now it's just rendering stuff, but if you give it some time, it'll play in real time.
What was this project for?
Just for fun. Yeah, it's gonna be like primitive technology videos.
Yeah.
It's gonna be like that, but like with a mushroom character.
Zach asked, can you demo the camera tracking? And he also said, ask him to demo how he handles animated shadows behind characters. Answer how you want. I don't know how long that stuff takes.
Yeah, I can show that real quick. But this is basically what you can do with Puppet tools. You can make it look a lot better than that, but if you just like have a piece of artwork that you want to animate, it's really helpful for that kind of style, like kind of a moving painting, or in this case it's a photograph. But it's a very powerful tool, and definitely very helpful for character animation. As you can probably tell, like if you do the same thing but with a character instead of just like a plant, you can then start to move that character around and do a whole bunch of fun stuff. So that's the basics of that one. And then we can show tracking really quick. I'm trying to think about a good footage for that. Actually, we could show it with the Jersey House,
Yeah.
the bumper that we made.
A little behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, you tracked for that one, right?
Yeah. So this is the most recent bumper that we made. It was about lanternflies. It was pretty spooky. Just gonna find a good shot we can show. Actually, I think probably the final shot's the best one. So I'm just going to duplicate this footage and then kind of start from scratch with this. So get rid of all the keyframes.
Z Moravich said, I had nightmares after watching the Lanternflies bumper. Great nightmare fuel.
Good. That was the intended effect. Okay, so we have this footage of this like trail from outside. Oh, and also a way to kind of solo something so you only see that layer. There's an option like to the left of the layer name where there's a little dot you can turn on, and then everything else will disappear and except for that layer. Then you can just turn it back off if you want to see everything else again. Which makes it helpful if you just want to like work with one thing at a time. But yeah, you select this, and then on the right side there's a bunch of those options that I mentioned at the very beginning. And one of those is called Tracker. And this is how you can like track objects to footage, or I guess it would mostly just be footage, but it could also be like an animated video file as well. But anything that you want to like track the motion of, you can use this tool for. So there's a bunch of different options like track camera, warp stabilizer, stabilize motion, but for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to do track motion. So once you click that, it'll create a little track point right in the center of the screen. And so the basics behind tracking something is you want to find a spot with the most contrast that the computer can identify as like a fixed point that it can follow. So you might want to watch the footage a couple times to make sure like the point that you're tracking to doesn't get covered at any point and is like consistent throughout the entire footage. So I think what I used for this one, I think it was like let me actually see. Okay, so I use this area here. Yeah, so I think I use this little like white dot on this stick or this leaf. So from my understanding, the middle box is like the area that it tracks, and then the bigger box surrounding it is the other area, or is the area that the computer will sort of search around to see how that the tracking area compares to like its surroundings, if that makes any sense. So like basically the computer is only going to look at this area versus like the middle point to kind of see like, okay, is this middle point different from its surroundings, to know whether or not to track it. So once you have that set up, you then go over to the analyze option. And also you can like track not just position, but you can also do rotation and scale. But for this, we only have to do the position. So in the analyze options, you have like these arrow keys, or these arrow symbols, and you can either do like where you play it and it analyzes it frame by frame, or you can manually go through and actually track like frame by frame just by clicking through it. And I've heard that it's actually more accurate if you do it manually, but I'm not entirely sure if that's true or not, because it's worked out for me either way if I just let it play and just let it track. So you can see how it's following that little white dot, and it's pretty much like locked in there, so it should be a pretty good track. Yeah, so now it's all done. But now you might wonder, like, what are you going to do with all this data? because there's a bunch of like keyframes that say a bunch of stuff that's confusing and no one really understands. So how to actually transfer that into something that you can use, there's a way of like putting all that data onto a target. So in this case, I would make a null. This kind of also shows like the power of nulls that we were taking a brief look at before. So you make a null and then you go to edit target. And so that null was null 12. And it's also helpful if you name things. Just helps keep track of all the nulls and just different layers and everything. So that the target has now been changed to null 12, and then to actually bring that data to the null, you just press apply. And it asks, do you want to apply dimensions x and y, or x only and y only? We want to do both. So now null 12 has all that data that we just tracked. And then we take the object that we want to track it to, which is the logo. And then we just we pick whip it to that same null, and then now it'll actually follow along the path of that null. It actually doesn't track perfectly because this should also be attached to a scale. So now it should actually work better. There we go. Yeah, so that's like basic tracking. There's also 3D camera tracking and stuff like that, but that's a little more complicated. And I'll probably do that in another tutorial someday. Oh, and then the shadows. I think we also have an example of that in this animation. Like putting a shadow behind a character. Yeah, I think it's in this scene. For that, like, I guess you could do it multiple ways, but for this, I just made like a mask on a solid layer, and then did keyframes that kind of roughly animated to the animation of the tree person falling. So that's pretty like, it's a pretty rough way to do it, but it gets the job done if it's like a simple animation that you don't have to animate a ton of mask stuff for. But you could also do it like if it's something a little simpler. You could just do, I'll just duplicate this for the sake of showing it. But if you have the layer here, you could actually, there's an effect called drop shadow. So this will give you some options for like adding a shadow to that character. So you can change the direction so it's below them, and then change the distance. I think it's still loading in. There we go. So yeah, you can change like the softness of it so it's not such a hard shadow. I think this file is kind of big, so it's a little slow.
Is this what you used for the final piece?
No, I just used a black solid and then animated like the mask as she fell. So this wouldn't really work if you like, if you wanted someone to like fall from a height and like the shadow to get bigger, you wouldn't really be able to use this because it's very like two-dimensional. But I guess for like some simple stuff, or like if she was just laying already on the ground laying down, like you could just use this as like a quick way of giving her a little bit of a shadow. And in the other animation, like when I had shadows over his arm, or so these like flowers and the pot are kind of, they have like a little bit of a soft shadow onto the character. It's actually pretty simple because basically what I did is I just copied the foreground element, which was this, and then I alpha matted that into the yellow guy character, like his composition. And so that basically like put that layer inside of him, but then I filled the layer with a dark purple and then just blurred it, and then cranked the opacity down to 25. And that way it kind of looks like the layer is sort of like casting a shadow on him a little bit. So there's different ways you can do it, but generally it's like masking or alpha matting stuff. And then also the drop shadow is an option if you need like a really simple shadow effect. Yeah, but I think that's about it for what I had planned. Oh, I just realized this is going to be on screen. But
Somebody said, by somebody I mean Zach,
Mhm.
would you also be able to duplicate the character layer and put it under the main character layer, make that a solid and use that as a shadow? Or is that not the best practice?
yeah, you actually kind of could, like, if I just turn off this foreground and we just have him, you can kind of see I did a reflection too, which you can't really even see, so I don't know why I did that, but yeah, so like if I copied him and I'll actually turn off the background too, just so we can actually see it. Yeah. So if I made a copy of this character, okay, I think I got it. You could do toggle switches and modes. This goes into like more complicated stuff, but we're going to use it in a pretty simple way. But you can actually do 3D animation in After Effects. So you can make this into a 3D layer by checking on this little box. And so then you can actually like rotate it. And then if you wanted like the shadow to go this way, you could kind of make a shadow that way and then just like fill it up with a dark color. And then just like turn the opacity down. And then also like Gaussian blur is kind of a go-to blurring effect. Yeah, and then just like turn that back on. Well, actually, I'll just make a white background. Yeah, so it's like a movie poster or something.
Yellow guy waters space. Sweet.
Yeah, that's all I got.
He says, "Whoa, my mind has been shooketh."
Shooketh.
He said, "That was cool, but now demo Cinema 4D."
Next time. On the next tutorial Tuesday.
Next. We haven't decided what the next tutorial will be about,
Yeah.
but maybe.
Alright.
Does anyone
Cool.
have any questions?
I want to look at the chat, but I don't want to like create the matrix.
Oh, here. Wait.
I want to see Jack talk in a little window while I see him work.
Alright.
Cool.
Cool. Should I play us out?
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for coming.
Yeah, thanks everyone.
See y'all at the next one.
Yeah.
Might be trying to have one monthly, not sure. Still deciding. Tell us what y'all like, what y'all didn't like.
Tuesday.
Tomorrow Tuesday.
Cheers, yeah.
Woo!